Okay, good morning.
Morning, David.
How are you today?
I am doing very well today, thank you. It's a lovely day outside, so nice to be sitting at home and working.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me. The purpose of this video is going to be to share on LinkedIn during this uncertain time some interesting conversations with interesting Bangkok thought leaders. So my guess is that most of the people will know who you are already, but a quick introduction. Ragil Ratnam is the chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce and the managing director and lead coach of Pure Growth Asia. What do you do in your day job?
So my day job is really twofold. Firstly, I coach executives around the world, mostly on business challenges, but also on interpersonal dynamics. And secondly, and the biggest part of my day job is designing and delivering leadership development programs for a variety of multinationals and small businesses around the world.
Okay. Obviously, this is a very unusual time for businesses, with most companies being remote, working from home. How are you coping with that? How's your business? Have you found ways to communicate with your team and with your clients?
Yes. So a lot of my work, even before this, has been remote because I work with a team that is quite global. I have colleagues in Singapore, in London, in Johannesburg, and in Durham, North Carolina, where Duke CE, who is one of my partner organizations, is based. So most of our calls are done remotely. We do a lot of design work remotely via email. Our meetings are virtual. And so that happens quite naturally. A lot of my coaching, because I have coaching clients in Tokyo, in Basel, in London, that happens quite naturally as well. The biggest challenge for me has been that my leadership development work is done face-to-face with groups of people, between 20 and 50 people. And I usually am working around Asia, in Kuala Lumpur, in Shanghai, etc. And that has all come to a complete standstill at the moment. Wow. So I've had to find ways to try and convert that to virtual learning.
So you've been working remotely for a while then with your teams globally. I think a lot of people in Bangkok, it's our first experience of work from home, of using many of these tools. Can you give us what is best practice for remote work in your experience?
There's a range of things that one can do to make working from home effective. I think some of the most important things are, first of all, to set boundaries, which is, if you're working with a global organization, you may be invited to meetings at 6 a.m. in the morning all the way through to 9, 10 p.m. at night. And especially in Asia, people expect you to be available quite late into the evening because the US is just waking up. So I think it's really important to set boundaries for yourself as to when you will be working, when you're able to take meetings, and to try and manage that so you don't let that leak into your home life, which is just as important for you to maintain your mental health and well-being and your sanity. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to try and keep some time between the meetings that you have virtually, and to arrange your time so that you can do all the things you need to do. Because what sometimes happens is you get sucked into, especially if you're working in a large organization, a range of meetings that everyone wants you to attend virtually, and you're basically going from one meeting to another. If you can, try and create time between meetings. First of all, to prepare for those meetings, but second of all, to try and do the work that comes out of those meetings, because a lot of that work is not in the meeting itself. You need time to do that. So if you can create time to actually do your real work between meetings, that's really important, I would say.
Okay. So the main reason I wanted to talk to you today was I've seen you discuss empathetic leadership a lot. And I think it's a really interesting topic. You're focusing at the moment, as well as your leadership development work, on helping companies to display empathetic leadership in a time of digital transformation. Could you unpack that a little bit for me, please?
Sure. So my focus on empathetic leadership is a very old one. I trained as a clinical psychologist a very, very long time ago in another life. But some of those skills and some of that experience has held me through all the work that I do, all the way from leadership development, guiding CEOs and executives through to executive coaching. And what I have found is that empathy, which is really, it's nothing magical. It's this idea of how do we understand the perspective and experience of another human being, is for me the fundamental tool or skill that can be used for CEOs or any leaders in understanding how best to run their organizations. So if you can put yourself in another person's shoes, for example, if you can put yourself in the shoes of your customer, you can really get a far better understanding of what it is that they might need that you can give them within the range of your services. And in fact, sorry.
Oh, sorry. So it's not just understand the customer to sell to them, but it's try to understand more deeply their pain points so that you can genuinely provide them with good services over the long term.
Very much so. And it's really about, so if you can understand what your customer's experience is, you can also be far more innovative in the way that you produce your product or do your service. So one of the things that comes to mind is there's a machine, we don't have it in Thailand, but it's the Coca-Cola Freestyle machine, which is available in restaurants and fast food places. And the Coca-Cola Freestyle machine is one where you can access a range of Coca-Cola flavors, but create your own customized drink, right? Okay. So you can mix Fanta and Sprite and Coke to whatever extent you want and drink that because that's what you think you like. And that came out of trying to understanding that customers want a little bit more control of what they drink and what the flavor is that they have. Mm. So and that has been a huge hit. And there are people that are still choosing the restaurants that they go to based on whether they have this machine or not.
Okay.
Right?
So Lexicon should get one of those machines then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it is even more fundamental than that. There's a big movement towards design thinking at the moment, and understanding how to design products. And the first part of design thinking is empathizing with your target audience or your customer, understanding what they're thinking, what they are seeing or experiencing, what they're feeling. Because if you can do that, you can design exactly the right product at exactly the right moment, mm-hmm. and allow your business to be far ahead of the competition.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good definition. Now is obviously a unusual and stressful time for employers and employees alike. Do you have any tips for the business leaders of the world on how they can be empathetic during this time of quarantine and remote work?
I think what's really important for business leaders to understand is that their staff and their employees, especially if you're working in a large and maybe global or multinational organization, is that other people in their organization may not be experiencing this crisis in the same way that they are. If you're living in a very nice apartment in Manhattan and you have access to food on order, or you can get people to do what you need to do, and you're self-sustaining in your apartment, that's very different from a staff member that you might have in South Africa who is working in a factory that you run that is producing parts for whatever product you do, who has to go home to a township which is under lockdown, where they're living in a home with 4 or 5 other people. They don't have a room to themselves. They may not even have access to data to engage in virtual calls. And I think it's really important for leaders to understand that what works for them may not work for everyone in their organization, and to take a moment and think about how other people within their organization might best be served by what they're trying to do in the organization for now.
I I think a lot of people seeing this are going to be of similar demographics to us, possibly expat leaders based in Bangkok with relatively small teams of Thais. Can you think of any tangible actions that we can take to display our empathy, whether it's in the messages that we convey to our teams or any other way that we can? Should it be about trying to, as you said, think cognitively, put ourselves in their shoes? Yeah, I guess I don't have the answer to this, but is it a communication method? Is it a different type of output that we can display to show empathy during this time?
So I think there are two things that leaders can do. Firstly, listening is probably the most important part of communication. As leaders, we're often told that you have to be able to communicate properly, and what that means is speaking and communicating ideas and sending those out to the world so people understand them. But actually, a huge chunk of communication is about receiving, and it's about listening to what your people are thinking and feeling. And empathy begins with trying to understand where someone is, and understanding where someone is can be done by listening to them. So taking the time to engage with your staff members, either in small groups or individually, can be a very powerful way, even if you don't do anything beyond that, to help people feel that you are understanding them.
Okay.
So that's the first piece.
So physical
the second
presence
piece is flexibility, is understanding that your small team, even if they seem to be quite similar, may have different backgrounds, different home lives. One of your team members may have a family with young kids and may not be able to sort of have calls at 5 o'clock in the morning because they're busy giving their kids breakfast. Whereas one of them may be, at home alone and wants to be in communication all the time. So I think it's really important. And if you have a big team, it's difficult to be flexible and customize your response to everybody. But if you can create patterns of flexibility that allow people to do their best within their own context, I think that makes a big difference for people.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So back to leaders for a moment. We, as leaders, have more time on our hands than usual. Usually, we're all running around the city, having meetings and attending events. There's not much chance to do anything at the moment. We can't go outside at the weekend. We can't go to the beach. We can't go to the library. So there's a lot more downtime than usual. What would you advise business leaders to do during this time to improve their empathetic leadership? Could it be perhaps reading, observing some TED Talks or something else? So
I think there are a lot of great TED Talks out there. And if you look at the top 10 TED Talks, you'll find something that you can connect with. One of my favorite TED Talks is anything done by Hans Rosling, the medical anthropologist, who talks about the power of statistics and talks about how the rise of Asia and how things are not as different around the world as we may think. So that's a really powerful one for me. I think the two things we can do beyond just sort of, watching TED Talks and seeing what other people think is to take some time to reflect. The word meditation can be quite a difficult and challenging one for people. And I'm not expecting people to sit in lotus position and, go om for like half an hour. But I think taking 5 or 10 minutes in the morning to just sit quietly and think about where you are, what you believe in, what you think, can be a really powerful experience for many leaders, because most of the time we don't have the mental space to do that self-reflection. And that can really help us understand not just who we are, but how we should best respond to the world as it is.
This is put the phone aside, turn off the computer, just sit there.
And just sit there, yes. And be with yourself. There's a beautiful, one of my favorite quotes is from my favorite author, who's a Japanese author called Haruki Murakami. And he differentiated, he said there is the difference between loneliness and aloneness is that loneliness is the absence of the other, while aloneness is the presence of the self. And if you can just be with yourself, you don't need to be lonely. You can, if you allow yourself the power of engaging with yourself, that can be a transformative experience.
Okay. I think that's really good advice. So I think from my experience with meditation, what I found is that the first few minutes, you have the kind of low-level frequency noise. Check phone, do this, do that. The more time you can spend ignoring those low-level signals, you get to higher frequencies. That sounds a bit pretentious, I know, but it gets to those big business ideas or the more complicated underlying things that, as you said, you wouldn't get to if you just go about your life. So yeah, I think it's definitely, it's almost a difficult thing to do nothing, but it's time well spent.
And in fact, you know, when you talk about the big business ideas, I mean, there's a lot of evidence and there's been a lot of writing recently as well. So one of the books I would recommend to people, and it's not a rocket science idea, but it's a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, which is about, in order to think deeply and do something meaningful, you need to put aside a significant amount of time without distraction. Mm. And I think that's something that's really important that leaders can take the time to do right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge to find that time. What about books? I think books are a great way for us to entertain ourselves during this time. Is there any, what would you recommend?
So there are a range of books. I think from a business and factual perspective, I would say Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, can change your thinking about how to approach problem solving and decision making. And it's a really, really powerful book based on a lot of evidence. So I'm a big fan of that. But I would also suggest that rather than just focusing on the latest thinking and the latest business books, that we go back to thinking that has been around for a very long time. So Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, Consolations of Philosophy by Boethus, which I know you read. I think what that does, going back to the source and the origins of Western thinking, allows us to realize that the challenges that we're facing, the thoughts that we're thinking, the things that humans are experiencing are not new. Digital transformation is just one change process in a history of change processes that have been happening to us for millennia. And going back to some of these early forms of thinking and writing allows us to realize that we are not alone. And there are things that have worked for millennia that we can use right now to help us in our thinking and our decision making and the way we do things. The other thing I would strongly encourage people to do is to not just focus on factual and business thinking. The power of reading fiction to bring up new ideas, to help you innovate, and to just help your brain refocus itself is really, really great. The way I go is I read a lot of mythology. So, you know, everything from the Bhagavad Gita to Norse mythology, Greek mythology, all of those things. But I think any form of fiction, from the deep philosophical works to, you know, manga and anime and comic books, I think all of those have a place in our lives. And we need to make sure that we give ourselves and give our brains time to play.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page when it comes to storytelling. I know we've spoken about this before. It is almost the primal urge and need as a species. We need narrative. We need to have some sense of order in the world. We need heroes and villains and things to work towards. So as you mentioned, manga, whether it's manga or Boethius or Marcus Aurelius or George Orwell, the same. There's only a few plots in the world. There's 7 basic plots to everything. We are all the hero of our own story. So when it comes to empathetic leadership, I would imagine that it's important to provide a narrative of an organization, as well as to show the individual where they fit into that story. That they're a protagonist. They're not just something that happens. They're not a character that's just in the background. They're not a NPC, but they're actually they're actually a core protagonist, that they have the ability to win or to lose.
And they have the free will and the ability to make those choices. And I think the one thing I would add to that is every hero in all the great stories is a hero not because they do things just for themselves, but because they do things for the greater good. And they bring something back from their hero's journey to their community, to their people, to their world, which makes their world a better place. And I think this is why I have found that in many large organizations that I work with, the ones that really succeed are the ones that have a sense of purpose and meaning. And a sense of purpose and meaning can only come through empathy and understanding what that means for ourselves and for other people.
My Boethius quotes are not really as they should be, but I remember he spoke about the wheel of life, the circle of life, where don't be too excited during the good times because they pass away, but so do the bad times. I think that's an important lesson for right now, that no matter how sucky the world may seem right now, the opposite will be true in 6 months, and things go in cycles. Now is a low cycle, but the good cycle is only around the corner.
Yeah, and I think what the low parts of the cycle do is allow us to appreciate the high parts of the cycle so much more. And I think these are the opportunities that we can use to figure out what is really important to us, you know. And what we're finding is that, I mean, we spoke a little bit earlier about this as well, this idea of, you know, what this crisis is showing us is that, you know, digital is really important, virtual communication is essential, you know, the way people work is changing, but it's also teaching us that human beings are not meant to be isolated from each other. It teaches us that human beings are meant to engage and connect and help each other and be a society and be a community. And if we can understand what's important from that perspective, as well as what's important from the movement in technology, we can then go through digital transformation far more easily and sustainably.
Well, that's a good segue actually to my next question. As you were saying, the need for community, the need for humanity and understanding digital transformation. I think that many businesses are getting a taste now for the first time of not only the technological capabilities of things like Zoom that we're on, but also perhaps even operating with a smaller workforce or automation. I think that the effects of digital transformation may be more acute than ever, because the generation above us even is seeing digital transformation perhaps for the first time. Once businesses return back to normality, how can businesses ensure that they display empathetic leadership? Now, you've already mentioned that empathetic leadership is not only about how you treat your employees, but also your customers. If you can understand their needs, you can give them good services. If you understand your employees, you can retain them. And it's a holistic circle of virtuous profit, I guess.
Sure.
But sorry, that's not really a question. The question is, how can businesses, leaders, show empathy once we return with digital transformation in operating at full speed?
So I think there are a couple of things that business leaders can do moving forward, because this process of digital transformation is really about, it's not just about the technology. It's not just about, you know, implementing new technologies in your workplace and making sure that people can communicate remotely or automating your factories. It is also about leading the people that will remain with you through this process, through that change, in as smooth a way as possible, so that they understand what they're going through and how to best get themselves ready for the future. So as a leader, I think it's really important to be really clear on what the world will look like for your business as we come out of this, because the world will be different. It will not be the same. And I think that this belief that we're, as soon as COVID-19 is over, we can go back to exactly the way things were is, I think, a fallacy. Things have already changed so much. People already know that we can work remotely even where we thought we couldn't. So it's about understanding what will remain and taking a lead on that. So understanding as a leader for your organization, how can you prepare your people for that new future? How can you make sure that they know what to expect and how they can prepare themselves? So a lot of it has to do with engaging with people and understanding where they are, what their challenges are, what their fears are, and helping them understand how to prepare for that. You can't always take the fear of the future away from people, but you can help them prepare for it.
Can we take this down to the ground a little bit? How kind of business, so we may hypothetically have a very caring and wise CEO of a company who is all about empathetic leadership and building a culture and a community-based organization. How can we ensure that once that person leaves, there is a framework in place, there is a structure in place, that the company is more than just numbers on a spreadsheet? How can you build a culture of empathy within a company?
That's a great question. And I think I may have been a little bit abstract in my last thing, but I think that's right. So I think, first of all, I would say that the numbers are important. It is important to understand that whatever you do in business, you have to be profitable and sustainable. Otherwise, you don't have a business. And I think it's very easy to see the power and the impact of empathy on profitability from the numbers, for example, in terms of the cost of acquiring a new customer is 5 to 25 times as much as it is to retain a current customer, right? And the amount that a long-term customer spends is twice to 3 times as much. And this is research from Bain, twice to 3 times as much over 24 to 36 months as a new customer would spend in the first year. So I think the numbers are very clear that understanding your customer experience is essential, and empathy is a core part of understanding and building a great customer experience and a great people experience.
And the same is true with employees, I would imagine, that it's a lot more expensive to recruit than it is to retain.
Very much so, yes. I mean, you think about how much you spend on headhunters and recruiters and so on. Maintaining people is far easier and more cost effective. So how do you create a culture? That's a great question, that one person may have, but may disappear if that person leaves and the organization isn't in a place to follow that up. So I would say, firstly, it's about having a very clear understanding of what the purpose of your organization is. So that may be in terms of your vision and your mission, etc. But a lot of it has to do with what is the personal purpose of everybody in the organization. How does that fit into the broader vision of the organization? Why does a staff member wake up in the morning and come to this job and want to do their best? Right? And the way people do their best is when they feel that what they are doing contributes to the greater vision of the organization. So communicating that is really important. The story, and I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, of Lyndon Johnson going to NASA and asking the janitor there, who was sweeping the corridor, so what is it that you do here? And his answer being, well, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. I think that is a really powerful statement of how everybody in an organization should feel a part of the bigger picture. So that's the one thing. The other piece is that you cannot do that without setting in place very clear processes to make that happen. So, you can't just expect people to come up with this themselves. You need to be able to put in place training, engagement, communication, all of those things, as well as step-by-step processes so people can understand how they fit in. And if you put these processes in place and you make sure that they are embedded, then it is far easier for an organization to make it part of their culture and have it go through their organization, even if you do leave. And I see that in some of the companies that I do work with, multinational companies that focus on leaders understanding how their purpose fits in with the greater goals of the organization, which allows them to make decisions without rules. Because if you have to create rules for every single decision, you will spend the rest of your life making rules for every exception. But if you help people understand the purpose of the organization and the parameters within which that would work, then people can make decisions far more easily in an independent way, which allows you as a leader to think about the future rather than micromanaging. So I think that's a really important thing.
So it's empowering people by giving them something of a framework, but not suffocating them with rules and regulations.
Very much so, yes.
Okay. That's really interesting. We at Lexicon have tried to build the frameworks of an organization like that. We're still emerging, we're still relatively small, but I think it's very important for a company of all sizes to have a clear sense of vision, mission, the purpose, the values, all of that kind of stuff. If a company is without these things and needs some help putting it together, can they call you?
Sure. Yes, I'm very happy to help. It's something that I enjoy doing. It's a passion of mine, is to help organizations find purpose, meaning, and become, sustainably profitable, as well as add to the greater good, I think. And I think those two things are not mutually exclusive. If you have a moment, I would love to share a story that, a friend of mine had a startup. He's moved on to a couple of different things now, but he was very young when he started this organization. It grew rapidly to an organization of 120 people. And because of the way he was leading them and allowing them to bring in their own thoughts and ideas, he had people who were sacrificing portions of their own salary to make sure that they met organizational targets without any input from him, because he had created a vision which everybody bought into. And that's the sort of thing that I think I hopefully have been able to help some organizations do in the past. And I'm very happy to help other organizations do that.
Okay. All right. So the final question is a little bit more frivolous. So we're all in quarantine at the moment, or we should be. What are your top 3 essentials that you must have during this time?
So I love reading. And while I have hundreds of books at home, I love the fact that I have a Kindle and I can, if I think of a book that I want, I can download it immediately and never have to leave the house. So I would say a Kindle with a Kindle account is essential for me. Secondly, I would say I love the fact that I live on the 33rd floor and I have a balcony which allows me to have an amazing view of this beautiful city of ours, Bangkok. And it allows me to feel that I'm not, to not get claustrophobic. I can stand outside and enjoy this feeling of being outside without ever having to go anywhere. And finally, this time at home has given me an opportunity to go back to stuff that I've let go, which is art. I used to draw and I used to paint. So recently I've downloaded this drawing app on my iPad, and I'm starting to learn to draw again, and digitally this time.
Wow.
And so I would say those are the 3 things that I really find essential for the moment.
Okay, so it's time well spent, reflection, education, and art. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for so much of your time this morning. I really appreciate that. It was a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you so much, David. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I really appreciated the questions.
All right, thank you so much.